everybody to the third Wednesday Humpday Hangout, issues and challenges in today's fire service. My name is Scott Thompson, and you're going to notice that the team looks a little different today. Chief Lasky is out presenting, and Chief Salka had a family commitment that he needed to attend. But I'm here with our other regular, Chief Birt, and we're going to get you through this. We have a very special guest today, which we will introduce in just a minute, and I believe we've got a good topic to talk about. Before we get started, just mention calls for presentations for FDIC have closed, so hopefully you got yours in. Best of luck. Now the real work starts. Chief Rhodes and Diane have their work cut out for them, trying to pick the lucky people who are going to present. And also on today, I want to take just a second and recognize the Charleston Nine. This is the anniversary from the event that occurred on 6/18 in '07. So we always want to keep them in our thoughts and prayers, and remember, never forget means never forgetting. So we have a good show, I believe, for you today in the line of duty, and we're going to talk about some about culture and mindset. Our special guest is Chief Daniel Deyear, who retired as a deputy chief from the Dallas Fire Department. Curtis and I have known Daniel for quite a while, and we've been wanting to get him on the show. Daniel has worked in just about every division, I think, in Dallas Fire Department. He's got great experience from training. DMS will let him give us his background in just a second. But one of the reasons why I wanted to get Chief Deyear on is he's had, I guess, fortunately and unfortunately, he's been very involved in several line of duty deaths that occurred over the course of his career. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're also going to talk a little bit about mindset and culture and what is in the line of duty when we're talking about being a firefighter or a firefighter paramedic. So Chief Deyear, welcome to the show. If you will, give us a little bit of your bio, and we'll kick this thing off.
Okay, welcome. Thank you. So I'm Daniel Deyear. I'm originally from the Bronx in New York City. So a word comes out every now and then that I know Scott can relate to, and certainly John Salka would know what I was talking about. Ironically, where I grew up wasn't far from where John worked. I was just down the street. If you go down Tremont Avenue and turn right on Unionport Road, that's where I'm from in Parkchester. But I started my career in the Northeast. I moved to Texas. I worked for the Carrollton Fire Department for almost 10 years. I left and went and became an international fire marshal with the U.S. Department of State for almost 2 years, where I was responsible for the fire and life safety at the embassies and consulates overseas. A long story short, I lived in a suitcase and traveled all the time. And my wife and I were about to get married, so we're trying to figure out how that was going to work. And I came back to Dallas and went to work for Dallas and did the last 32 years of my career in the Dallas Fire Department. And I retired after 45 years in the fire service here almost 2 years ago now. And since then, I do a lot of public speaking and teaching. So I kind of feel like I'm still in the fire service a little bit, even though I'm not practicing firefighter. I do maintain my certification, but I've now moved on to just trying to pay it forward because I still have a lot of passion for the fire service.
Well, we'll start us off, Daniel. Tell us how you kind of got involved in investigating and really being a student of these line of duty deaths. My belief is you not only were involved in ones in Dallas, but the way that Texas is set up, the major departments each year have a representative that's kind of on call, if you will, that if one of the large metro departments experiences an LODD, they send members. So get us started and talk a little bit about that, if you would.
So in reality, I've been around the line of duty death, unfortunately, throughout most of my career, although I never connected the dots and it never meant a lot to me. My rookie school partner, Vinny Davis, Deyear and Davis sat next to each other. We sat alphabetically in rookie school in Dallas, and Vinny was killed in the line of duty in 2002 in February in a building collapse, a vacant building, unfortunately, collapsed. A few months later, the instructor, who was our training officer originally, recruit training officer, he died on the second floor of an apartment building with a heart attack. And Todd Prodel, when he was killed on the job, I was at the hospital when he arrived. So I was already around a lot of line of duty death. But what ended up culminating was in 2013, I was the deputy chief of the training division for the Dallas Fire Department. And I got a call that fall where the chief told me, "Hey, you need to go to Austin. You are going to be on the State Fire Marshal's line of duty death task force next year." And apparently that role falls onto Dallas's lap every 6 years. It kind of rotates between the 6 big cities. It's Houston, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, Dallas, and Fort Worth. In 2012, Austin had it. 2013, it was Dallas's turn. And apparently that role fell in the lap of the deputy chief of the training division. So I went down to Austin. I met with the Chief Keneally, was the state fire marshal at the time. Dean, I'm drawing a blank on his last name, was his assistant. He was the one that was overseeing the LODD task force. And I remember when I met with him, I said, how many firefighters died in 2012 in Texas? And I believe he said 1. And I said, well, how many died in 2011? He said none. I said, how many in 2010? He said none. I said, how many died in 2009? He said they weren't doing anything back then, but he was pretty sure there was only 1. So we'd only had 2 deaths in the previous 4 years. So I kind of thought this was just my name going on a committee that would never really even be used. And unfortunately, when I was walking out the door, I did ask him a question I regret to this very moment. I asked him, I said, what happens, God forbid, if it's a Dallas guy? Am I still responsible for being on this task force? And he was quick to tell me no, it would immediately revert back to Austin from the previous year, and the Austin Fire Department would come up and do the investigation from the state fire marshal's perspective and not me. Well, I think what you're probably asking for here, in a 45-year career, there's 105 days of that 45 years where I ended up being involved in 20 line of duty deaths in 105 days. For those of you that don't recall, it started off in Bryan, Texas. They lost 2 lieutenants in a big box in the Knights of Columbus Hall in February of 2013. 2 months later in West, we had the explosion in West that killed 12 first responders, including one of them who was a good friend of mine, which is Kenny Harris. He was the captain of Engine 30 on the C shift in the Dallas Fire Department. And he and I were close friends. I used to be the captain on Truck 43, and we knew each other. 30s was the adjoining house, and Kenny lived in West. But I was down there the night. I was one of the first folks to get there that night from the Dallas Fire Department, because Texas Task Force 2 responded that evening. And I was able to give them a lot of information before they got down there. But then my role transitioned into helping the state fire marshal to sift through all the answers and the investigation. And then on May 30th, the words that I had used in the state fire marshal's office came back to haunt me. We lost Stanley Wilson on May 20th of 2013 in Dallas in a building collapse at an apartment house. And then 11 days later, to kind of culminate a 105-day period of time, the Houston Fire Department lost 5 firefighters in the Southwest End fire. So all of those investigative reports I was involved in, my name is on them. In Dallas, my name is not on the State Fire Marshal's LODD task force. I was responsible for writing the report for the Dallas Fire Department. It ended up being 701 pages. I'll sort of joke with tongue in cheek, there were a lot of photographs, but it was a very long, painstaking journey to get that report done, especially with the Houston incident coming just 5 days earlier. Since that horrible 105-day period of time in Dallas, we've lost several other folks as well. We've even lost a few folks that were passionate and impacted my life that really even weren't line of duty deaths. For example, when I was 807, the deputy on the B shift on the south half of the city, my driver, an engineer and partner and admin person and command tech at fires, he ended up dying in 2020, 6 months after he retired. He died from COVID. And then another good friend of mine, David Leos, he died from COVID, and I was in charge of his funeral. So I've had, unfortunately, and like you kind of said earlier, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate. It is what it is. But yeah, I've been around a lot of the line of duty deaths to know how the brotherhood works and how it shines at its worst moments. And I also have had the opportunity to see a lot of things that, we probably need to adjust or fix or at least discuss and talk about. So that's the unabridged.
And Curtis, you were up here, chief in Lake Cities during I think most of those when those occurred. So certainly here in the state, and remember some of those events. But we're titling this kind of in the line of duty, and tying it into mindset and culture. So let's kind of start there. Curtis, from your standpoint, before we have Daniel kind of get in the weeds a little bit, as career departments, even as volunteer departments, when we talk about in the line of duty, what comes to mind? And you got a son on the job. You were involved in training. You've been chief of the department. You're ops chief in a very progressive department now. But my belief, and I may be wrong, and I forgot to mention this. If you have a question, if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, you can just type into the comments, and we'll try to answer if we can. But I mean, Curtis, I feel like the fire service is struggling to really define what in the line of duty means. And I certainly want to hear from Daniel as he talks about some of the things that we need to rethink. But, with the son on the job and your experiences, what does that kind of look like to you? What do those words kind of mean to you?
I think the biggest thing now is we're just going through a totally different generational change. And I'm not saying Generation X or Generation Y. I think we're going through a change where we're really trying to see what this job is doing to us as a whole. Yeah, there's the normal definitions of being in collapses or flashovers or stuff like that. But in the recent years, we're adding medicals and we're adding cancer and now we're really big into the mental health part of it and what the mental aspects are on our bodies and our minds and the longevity that we have. I think not only are fires different, but I think people are different. And I think the way the job is affecting us as we've been raised is different. So when I look at my son, him and I have a lot of sit down talks, and we talk about, the job as a whole, not just the tactics and strategy we do every day, not just from wearing your seatbelt when you go. Back when we were going, it was hanging on the back step of the truck going, and LODD was you were burned up or you were collapsed on. Now there's so much more that we're adding into this. And I think it's stuff that we have to look at and we have to prepare for, but we also have to educate and train and get everybody to understand that it's a much bigger open view than it used to be. LODDs now incorporate so many things that we have to, just like anything else, we have to plan for it. We have to talk about it. We have to make decisions about it, and we have to prepare our folks for it.
So Daniel and Curtis, I think you framed that up. Excellent. Daniel, unfortunately, you have a lot of experience in this, but why don't you kind of, based on what Curtis kind of said, you made the comment that there's some things we need to look at. Based on your experiences and that 105 days, what are some things that jump out to you right away as far as an organizational culture, the firehouse, maybe microcultures, and then that mindset that results from those cultures? What are some of the patterns that you've seen, and some of the things that have just kind of jumped out that we need to talk about?
Well, I think the two big things that jump out to me is a lot of times we're not having those conversations. We're just not. We're not having the discussion, because as soon as somebody shares an opinion on the safety side of the fence or on the other side of the fence where, hey, we're their last hope, we took an oath, we swore to serve and protect. As soon as somebody starts to hear something that takes them out of their comfort zone, we almost immediately revert to the argument aspect of it, and now everybody stops listening. And Curtis, to your point, I don't think this is a fire department thing. This is a societal thing. That's the world we're in today, right? I mean, if we don't agree on something, we hate each other. And unfortunately, because of the age that we are on this show here, we remember a day where it wasn't like that. It was no problem that you voted a certain way, or you believed a certain way, or you worshiped a certain way, or you shopped a certain way. Nobody cared. We could just agree to disagree. So it's almost like every time we start to have a discussion now, we want to have an argument. And what I have seen is we tend to miss those lessons. So there's in no department that I'm familiar with, and I've been around a long time. So there was the fire service doesn't look like it did in the late 1970s or the early 1980s, but it's evolved. It's evolved good and it's evolved bad. I mean, the things have changed. I'm one of those folks that came into the fire service and I wanted to be a firefighter. That's all I wanted to be, was a firefighter. But an EMS hadn't been around for very long. And then all of a sudden a bell went off and I thought, okay, we're going on EMS runs. I want to be good at that too. I mean, if I'm willing to risk my life to pull somebody out of a burning building, why would I not want to know how to help a 5-year-old that drowned in a pool or was involved in a car crash or somebody who had a heart attack? And of course, now we know, 45, 50 years later, we now own EMS pretty much across the country. I know it's different from certain departments, and we serve the community, but everything has changed. And we've had to become much more educated. While this used to be a passion for some folks, you know, I still hear everybody want to talk about the tradition and the pride of our fire service. And I'm all about that. But if you think about what that pride really was or what the tradition stemmed from, it stemmed from serving the community. I mean, people worked in their community and served their community. Every one of our fire departments, I don't care if it was John's department or any of our departments or anybody listening here, you were all volunteer at one time. New York City was volunteer at one time. Dallas was volunteer at one time. Ironically, even if you went to the Dallas Firefighters Museum and found one of the logbooks from 1940 and pulled that book out, pick a company, 17s or 14s or 8s, and you pull that book out, in the front of the book, there's a roster. And in that roster, it has everybody addresses and their phone numbers. Of course, the phone numbers in 1940 were like 5 digits long, but everybody on that worked at that firehouse, every single one of them lived within walking distance of the firehouse. So not only were they working for the Dallas Fire Department, they were working in their own community. They knew who the barber was. They knew the name of the people at the grocery store. They went to the same church, you know, so there was a sense of community. And we know, like in certain areas like Long Island and upstate New York and other areas around Houston, you still have volunteer fire departments. And those people live in the community. They serve the community. I know later this week, or as we speak right now, the SFFMA conference is going on in Frisco, and I'm speaking with them on Friday, and those are men and women who still live in their community and serve their community, and it comes from their heart, and it comes from service, and it comes from community, and we all had that, but now the fire service doesn't quite look like that as much anymore, and it's not that we've done something wrong. It's just the whole world's moved. We're now more transient. Most people don't even live in the communities that they serve or they work in. And that's okay. We can't fix that. We're not forcing that. But then it becomes a detachment. But the thing that bothers me about the line of duty deaths is, in what I saw up front, close and personal, it impacts everybody. I mean, a firefighter death is a death to the community. It's a death to the organization. It's a death to the firefighters. And it's far reaching. And any one of you that's on the show that's ever been to a firefighter funeral or you work or live in a community that's had a death, you know what it's like. I mean, teddy bears and animals and flowers and cakes and candles show up at the firehouse. And maybe not even the firehouse that the person worked in, but if it's in that community, they're doing that. Curtis, you guys had a very close near miss here not too long ago. And I know your community had a huge outpouring. It wasn't like a guy that works at the Pearland Fire Department got hurt. It's like the city of Pearland had a loss. The community had a loss. We're not good that one of our firefighters is laying in a hospital trying to recover. And I think that's good. I think that's the last bastion of hope for us. But I do know a lot of firefighters that don't connect with that. Does that make sense? It's a job. I show up here. I'm here for 24 hours or 48 hours. I get in my car and I leave. And this was just a job, where I know you guys, this is a career. This is a passion. This is a calling. And I think that kind of helps set the table so that when we start to have these difficult conversations, like, is there anything we could have done where the firefighter didn't get killed? If we had a redo, what would we do different? There is an answer to that every single time, because never was there a plan that the firefighter got killed. We can talk about how dangerous this job is all day long, but that's not in the plan. And there is something we can go back in and at least learn from. What would we do differently? Now, there are the occasional things where nothing went wrong. There's no way we could have avoided it, and it clearly happened. I do know of a couple of those, and we could talk about them if you want to. But
well, Daniel,
go ahead.
Wasn't Vincent Davis kind of one of those where he was outside the building and just really kind of passing by when that came down on him? I mean, there
Yeah,
are some. Go
they
ahead.
were walking through an area of the building that was not on fire. The building that they were passing between was a two-story apartment house. They were passing through the first floor. The building they had been searching was not on fire. It was not attached. It was abutted against the other building, and they were walking through a breezeway. And there was a collapse where the fire was, which was probably 100 feet from where they were. And when the collapse occurred, there were pipes in the attic that ran horizontally. And when they pulled the pipes, the building pulled the pipes, it pulled the brick facade off the building and it fell right where they were. And it caused a catastrophic collapse where they were. They were taking no risk walking through a dangerous area. And yes, that was one of those scenarios. I'm not so sure if we had a redo, we would be changing anything. By the grace of God, we almost lost 4 people, but we only lost Vinny that day. I mean, originally there were 4 people with the crew. The captain got tripped up and he fell down the stairs. He didn't got caught in the collapse. There was another firefighter with Vinny who did get caught in the collapse and was buried. And then ironically, Scott Tanksley was the 4th firefighter who was just stepping into that hallway when the collapse occurred, and he turned and the collapse missed him. Unfortunately, Scott gave his life in the line of duty, years later.
On a very bread and butter call that you would think had very low risk, but turned out to be tragic. So I want to ask this question to both of you, and I think this is one of the things that the fire service is really struggling with. Daniel, you have the experience, but Curtis, so do you. And I never thought I'd hear myself say these words, but we're all kind of influencers in our own way. We go around and we preach a message. So to those young firefighters who are still trying to figure out their way, how do we build a mindset that has a problem solving or an aggressive problem solving mindset? That's why we exist in the community. I've worked at a lot of organizations. I've been a chief in several organizations, and never once did a city manager hire me say your number one priority is to take care of your guys. It's always take care of the community. Now, to be a good leader, obviously, if we take care of our guys, they'll go take care of the community. But what's the message? I've heard firefighters say it's not our emergency. I've heard a chief say, I'll burn down the entire city before we'll risk injuring a firefighter. Well, those are very, very broad statements. So how do we kind of communicate that to this new generation of firefighters and fire officers on what is acceptable risk and what is unacceptable risk? Curtis, to you first. How do we package that?
That's a great question. And I think it's really one of the things that we struggle with trying to put it in perspective for each person on the job or everywhere we go. Forever we've lived with the risk nothing to save nothing, risk everything to save nothing. How do you put that into feelings, or how do you put that into actions? Sometimes with the videos and everything you watch, and it's like, okay, how do you use those to teach people that this is what we do, or we'll risk and we won't risk? Like Daniel was saying, we had a near miss about a year ago, last October, and it was a defensive fire. They were outside the building. The building collapsed and it caught Eddie. He was risking nothing to save nothing, and he still got hurt. So, it's a really interesting thing to put together. And I think more and more than we ever have to before, we have to look at it individually and company-wide, not just as department-wide, because we have to get these people, we have to get all our firefighters and our members to understand what is risk and what are we saving or not saving, and what are we all willing to do and not do, and it's a new time and it's a new thing to come up with.
Yeah, I agree totally. One of the things that I'm kind of pushing, we've all heard, as you made reference to, risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little, risk nothing to save nothing. And I'm kind of on a mission to change that to let's prepare a lot to save a lot. Let's prepare a little, save a little, be unprepared and risk losing everything. But Daniel, with your experiences, same question to you. We're talking to young firefighters or young company officers who've got to figure out how to put the team on the field, and truly to be aggressive problem solvers. I'm going to say unapologetically, that's what our citizens expect. They expect us to show up and aggressively solve their problem. And of course, aggressive is one of those words in the fire service that causes that argument that you spoke of. But kind of same question to you, Daniel, with your experiences. How do you package that? How do you prepare an officer for the decisions that he or she is going to have to make within the guidelines of protecting our people?
Well, first of all, if you're asking for an opinion, I would take that term risk versus reward and stop using it. It means, to me, it means nothing in the fire service. It's one of those warm, fuzzy things that we say, risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little. We understand that to a point. But every single, even if the three of us were working on the same fire truck right now, and we're at the same incident, every one of our levels of risk are different. Our comprehension of risk is different. And what we think is a reward is not the same. And what bothers me is I hear and I see so many departments that make that statement, and it's like they check the box. It's like, we told our guys, risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little, save a little. And we feel like we accomplished something, and we didn't. Everybody's confused because we still understand that everything that we do comes with a risk, right? Just driving to the firehouse to go on duty comes with a risk. You're driving a motor vehicle on the streets and the highway. And what exactly is a reward? And probably everybody that's listening to the show right now, they've been in a fire. Every one of you have. I know I've even talked to some of you about this, where you stayed in there a little too long. You were buried up a little bit too deep. You got your butt kicked, but you did put the fire out. You were excited. You were proud. You went outside. You high-fived each other. You did a good job. You slayed the dragon, or you at least put the fire out. And then next shift, you drove by there and you realized they bulldozed the building the very next day. You didn't save anything. They tore the building down. And now you're thinking, wow, what did we take that risk for? So I like what you had just said. I can't paraphrase even what you just said, but I think the focus needs to get away from just saying fuzzy words. The other word I really don't like, and it's just for the sake of debate with you right now, is like the word aggressive. I considered myself an aggressive firefighter, but the word firefighter is an aggressive term. Why is that not enough? We're not fire debaters. We're not fire negotiators. We're not fire salespeople. We're firefighters, and fighting is aggressive. So it's almost like we're redundantly now trying to reestablish the fact that we're fighters. Everybody knows we show up and put the fire out. Now, we know amongst ourselves that there are some folks that aren't educated, they're not trained, they don't have the experience. There might be some that even have a mindset that, we're not even going to take a risk to put a fire out. And that we all know that that's clearly dangerous. That's not the right way to go. So I think we should start changing some of those terms and at least making sure people understand what those mean. And the reason I say that is jokingly, talking to you two guys, I'm talking to old guys, and I can call you that because I'm older than you are, but we're old guys. So we come from a different culture, and we had seasoned, experienced folks who took us under their wing when we were new firefighters and we were green and we didn't know what was going on. But now you morph, even in the Dallas Fire Department, we have folks who get to the rank of lieutenant on an engine company, and they hadn't been to too many fires in their career. They were on the ambulance for half of the fires. So they were second due or their third due. They were not, on the nozzle. And we don't have the same level of experience. Even if John Salka was here talking today, at year one, how much fire experience did he had? And now in today's world in FDNY, at the end of 1 year, how much experience does a 1 year firefighter have? It's not the same as it was back in the day when John came on the job. So we're lacking in the experience side of it, but a lot of us still hold out that we're still going to keep playing the game the same way. And I think that's where my concern is. And what I'm excited about is folks like yourselves and David Rhodes and Mike Galliano and people like Mike Dugan that are out there still talking to folks, trying to help bridge that gap, that we're not arguing, that we're understanding what we're talking about. But I think we're still failing. I think there's still sometimes a disengagement. And I hate to say generational, because that's not a good term, but I do see that there's certain groups of folks that the mindset is, we're not safety oriented. And I'm not the guy that's standing there saying we just need to focus on safety. I don't completely agree with that, because we can all debate that sometimes not being aggressive is dangerous in our industry. But are we trying to sell people on the word aggressive, or are we really trying to define the role of the firefighter at the moment that job really matters the most? That makes sense?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, and we do cause confusion, but let's go back to the word safety. If you look up that definition, it means without risk, free from harm. And as you mentioned, I always tell the story when I was in Louisville, I was always in charge of investigating accidents. And I was housed with an engine, a truck, a battalion, and an ambulance, and we had a reserve engine, and it didn't have the old skull saver on the ladder. You remember the yellow things they put on there? And I remember a morning, one of the guys in the truck came in with blood gushing out his head. He hit that ladder, so he goes off to the hospital, gets 16 stitches. That afternoon, the guy that witnessed him did the same thing. So we're like 30 plus stitches into the shift, and we haven't even left the firehouse. So, I think using the word safety is parallel with using the word aggressive. We can make this job safer. We can make it less dangerous, but there's always going to be risk, and we're always going to operate in a risk environment. So again, what is the word we use? And we say firefighter. Do we want to say deliberate problem solvers? Do we, to me, it's based on our operational capabilities and limitations. But so what are we doing to fill that when we have a fire company show up on the scene? And we're providing them some kind of direction, some kind of motivation. What do we want them to do? How actively involved do we want them to get in the incident?
I think the situation dictates that.
Well, it does, but you got to start someplace, right? You got to have a mind. We're talking about mindset. So you have to have a mindset when you set the parking brake. And I refer to it as the zero impact period, the time from when we set the parking brake till we start solving the problem. But I think every one of us would agree that we all either have an optimistic or a pessimistic mindset on survivability. Would you agree with that? That we're going to pull up and we're either going to say, oh, there's no way anybody can be alive in there, or we're going to pull up and say, hey, there's a room that looks like we can possibly occupy it and determine if everybody's in there. So we have a lot of years of experience. How do we package that? What are the words that we want to use to make sure that we're serving the public's needs while taking care of our own?
So are you asking me or Curtis?
Either one of you, jump in there.
I think he's exactly right, and I think you are too. As the safety thing, I think is a pendulum. It goes all the way to one side, and then all of a sudden it swings back and goes the other way. And there was a class that you and I, Scott, went to a while back at FDIC where Jason from New York City, I think, he was a Marine, and he comes in and he goes, we took safety out of the books and we put smart. And ever since there, that's what I've always done. So, when you say aggressive, we aggressively attack this, or we aggressively, I think of it more, and I definitely don't say it as much as I probably should. I want you to get off of the truck, and I want you to look at the situation. I want you to be smart and deliberate. You need to be smart. You need to read the building. You need to know what it's doing. You need to be able to read the fire. You need to know if there's people in there. You need to search. You need to do all that stuff. But everything you do needs to be smart and deliberate. If that means that you're going in there with fire over your head, then that's what you're doing, because you have a feeling, or that there's people in there, or you're going to do a search. Aggressive to where you're stupid, there's all the times we get guys that go into buildings that we know nobody's in, we're defensive, but we want to go in there because we know our gear can handle it. I grew up like you guys did. I was in 3/4 boots, and we didn't know what hoods were, and we wore, fireball gloves. We didn't rely on our gear to save us. We relied on our heads and our ears. Now we're going places that maybe we shouldn't. Isn't that deliberate good or deliberate bad? So I think we want our firemen to be very smart. We want them to make decisions. We want them to be able to see what they're seeing, and without going through command and getting permission and getting orders and that. We have people that go, they know what their job is. They know what the parameters are. Smart and deliberately get done what has to be done, without being stupid, without being, going into somewhere you shouldn't be, or going somewhere, because just like Daniel said before, things are going to happen anyway. The one with Dallas where the pipes pull down a whole building, 2 buildings down, and kill somebody. Our situation, the guy's pulling a hose around a building, we're going defensive. He got a little bit too close and the building fell on him. Things are going to happen anywhere. So if we're not smart and we're not deliberate, are we being the best that we can be? And are we really providing our mission and fulfilling our mission to the level and the expectation that the citizens expect us to?
That's funny you said that, Curtis, because I did the same thing. We replaced being safe with being smart. So Daniel, with your experience, what's your take on that? And how do we package this thing? How do we create this mindset and then a culture that values it so that when I walk in the firehouse at 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever time your tour starts, and I'm putting on my game face, I understand it's situational, right? It's firefighting is situational first and local second. We're going out the door to an incident, and we only have what we have as far as staffing and equipment, and I get all that. But as a mindset from a firefighter, we'll use your terminology. We'll remove the word aggressive. What should kind of be on our list of top 3 or 4 or 5 things that we need to be ready to do? We debate about searching off the line. To me, that's an opinion. That's a chief's opinion based on his experiences and the trust that he or she has in their organization. Vertical vent is another one. Working above the fire, VES. These are all things that we're struggling with in a service that shares a common mission. So how do we bring a little clarity to that?
Well, it's funny, just to play off the words you just said just now, it's like we all have a common mission, but why does every single fire department that's listening to this right now have a different mission statement? There should be one mission
That's
statement.
Question number one.
Fire service. Right. So we already start in the background separating it out. To your point earlier, by the way, Curtis, exactly. I think we should take the word safety everywhere and remove it, but the word smart. And for me, I think that's a movement in the right direction. I would not remove the term firefighter. I'm good with it. I know we're basically just problem solvers. That's all we are. You call with a problem, we come solve it. That's what we all do for a living. But the world knows what a firefighter is, and the folks who are firefighters know what that is. So I'm good with the term. I only brisk occasionally when I hear somebody say I'm an aggressive firefighter, because that implies that there's firefighters out there who aren't aggressive. Now, I do know that those exist, but I think most firefighters, know that's necessary at times. You have to be aggressive at what you do. I think when we talk about the culture, and I might be delving into something here you really wouldn't want to necessarily talk about, but I'll use some of the departments I'm familiar with. I know some departments we can go to right now, and their helmets or their PPE is not NFPA compliant, and it's not compliant with the Texas Commission on Fire Protection. They would be removed from gear because they're burned up, they're jacked up. So there is a process where that's supposed to not exist. There is an NFPA standard, there is a TCFP standard. And if you showed me a firefighter right now whose gear is jacked up hanging on a rack somewhere, my next question is going to be, well, where the hell's their officer? And how did the battalion chief not see him at the last run they went to? And how did the chief of the department or anybody else in administration not see their Facebook posts or their Instagram pictures where they're posting with these burned up helmets? And that's the individual that I'm worried about, because I think that's the individual we're talking about. So now how do we take that individual and say, we're going to take the word, aggressive out of the equation. We're going to take the word safety out and put the word smart in. And all they care about is, I need to look like a burned up, jacked up, tough, badass firefighter. How does that mindset change? And the reality is as you and I all know, I know some guys who fought fire by the hundreds and went to a lot of fires, and their gear didn't look anywhere near as jacked up as some of these young guys' gear looks, and they've only been to a couple of fires. I mean, if you show me a burned up helmet, I don't get me wrong. I know you could have gotten a flash over. You might have been trying to get to those kids in the back room while they were still screaming. And if you come out and your helmet's all burned up, your gear's all jacked up, you can't read your insignia anymore. Your fork flip eye shields are half melted. All the power to you. You did your job. That is the aggressive part of being a firefighter. Now go get a new helmet. Replace it. Get it compliant with NFPA standards. So now if you have an organization that allows that to fester, And now all of a sudden you have other firefighters that are like, hey, my helmet's more jacked up than your helmet is. Well, that's not serving the community. We're not even having a community discussion anymore. It's a me discussion. And we're trying to live up to an image, and we want to use the word, well, tradition. We're like all three of us. We did have fireball gloves. We didn't have Nomex hood. We had 3/4 boots. We rode the tailboard, and that word. I'll be the first. Yeah, I'll be the first to tell you, and you guys are probably the same way too. The Nomex hoods to my generation were really dangerous for several years because we were so used to our ears telling us where the fire was, or if we were making any progress in getting the fire knocked down. And all of a sudden now we're encapsulated. And by the time you reached up there and realized somebody was pinging your ears, you should have been out of there and it was too late. At least the newer firefighters have known no other way. But in our generation, we used to rely on our ears. You'd get burned occasionally. I mean, that was your barometer for bailing out. Now we're fully encapsulated. So we had to learn the hard way. But so if you take a firefighter whose goal is, no matter what, I want to get in there and just get my helmet jacked up, here's my problem. I don't think you're focused on your search. I don't think you're focused on your forcible entry. I don't think you're focused on doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're too focused on trying to be somebody you're not. And that's the folks who concern me the most in our organizations. And then if the organization allows that, now I'm worried about the organization, because now we've taken our eye off the ball. I mean, it's hard. The skills we're talking about, forcible entry, vertical ventilation or ventilation period, and definitely doing a search or getting that to that seat of that fire. We struggle to find ways to create that training. I mean, we know experience is great, but we can't manufacture experience. I mean, a firefighter in Pearland or a firefighter in the Colony or a firefighter in Dallas, depending where you are in Dallas, that experience level looks very different after 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 20 years. So you can't manufacture that, but we can make up for it through training and education. But now we're somewhat hindered on that. I mean, I joke, I think NFPA 1403 has hurt the fire service in a lot of ways. We make it damn near impossible now to burn a building. I remember, by the grace of God, coming through a generation where if they were tearing down an apartment building or they were tearing down a house, we could get permission to go out there and burn on it all day long and actually find out about what fire dynamics and thermodynamics and building construction was all about. Now we're handcuffed today. We can't do that unless you've got, 13 people on a safety team, with RIT and everything else established to do a live fire training. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm well aware that some people have done some pretty stupid things and gotten people killed in training. If I'm not mistaken, I think this very week we had a LODD in this country on a training exercise. How the hell does that happen in 2025? If I'm not mistaken, I think there was a firefighter fatality in North Carolina that occurred during a live training exercise. I mean, how does that happen? Maybe we start there. So now we're trying to get the firefighters to make that split-second decision, like you said, when they come off the rig, when they pull up, okay, that's a building we can't even go in. There's nobody in there alive. Versus, okay, we still got 3, 4, 10 rooms that we could still get in. Let's get in there and get that search. But now we're assuming everybody's highly trained to do that. And we know that that's not always the case. And then you take the mindset of the individual going in there. And if all they're thinking is, oh man, this is a great fire and get my helmet jacked up, they're not focused on the mission. The mission's not to get your helmet jacked up. The mission's to go in there and get anybody out of there. So where's your
So you bring up let me interrupt you for just a minute. You bring up a great point. And you're talking about these guys with these burn up helmets. One of the things that I think we fail to address, and maybe I just don't see it because I haven't been as involved, but one of the questions we get to ask or really look into is, when is the last time that person actually did that task? So let's just take vertical vent as an example. A firefighter that hasn't gone to the roof in 5 years is now sent to the roof, and he or she fails. To me, that's not a vertical vent problem. That's a system problem where they put a person who wasn't recently rehearsed in an environment and they failed. So in your experiences, and I don't want you to get specific, but have you found out that the victims of some of these line of duty deaths were those firefighters that did have the burn up helmet and did have that esprit de corps, that bravado, if you will? Have you made that connection to actual line of duty deaths?
In a couple, yes, but no, I think I've seen more with the near misses personally, with the burns or the very near misses. And I'm not alluding to Pearlands. I'm talking about the ones I was firsthand knowledge with, in Dallas. I think there was a couple of those we can tie into the fact that, they were not doing the right thing and by the grace of God got lucky. But to your point, like you say, we had a LODD in Dallas where the firefighter that went to the roof, was in full PPE, put their SCBA on, turned their SCBA on. It was on, but they didn't put the face piece on. And unfortunately, they went through the roof and subsequently they perished in the fire. And, so the question that we could easily say in a report is, shame on them. They should have had their face piece on. Well, we don't know that would have made a difference. It might not have changed the thing in the fire. But if it is, we haven't talked about this at all in this show, but it one of the drawbacks to investigating LODDs is I have the disadvantage of knowing how the fire ends before we start the investigation. And that jades everything that you look at. So it's real easy to say to you or I, let's like, well, why would they have done that? It doesn't matter what we think. It mattered why they thought that. Right. And I think that's where the failure comes into from taking those reports. It's not, why did he not wear his mask or why did he not put his face piece on? The question is, why did he deem that he'd not do that? Because that's where the problem needs to be altered if we're ever going to alter it. And there's good reasons. I mean, and this was a strange fire that I'm referring to right now. It was not a well-involved attic. It was not a heavily charged attic. As a matter of fact, if he'd walked up there the day before, he would have fallen through the roof because it had burned 13 years earlier and they put a 1/4-inch piece of plywood over the hole. I mean, it was just a weird set of circumstances. But to your point, we train like we play. And I know both of you well enough to know your departments do that on a daily basis. And kudos to you, because I'm aware of a lot of fire departments that don't do that. They don't train like they want to play. And, to get the repetition and the muscle memory to not be worried about, did I do everything I was supposed to do before I got off that truck? Did I do everything I was supposed to do before I went into that building? We can solve that. There is a solving to that. Now, what happens when you walk through the door in the building? That's a different story. But if you're still fumbling with your mask or fumbling with your hood when you're inside the building, you're not focused once again on the mission that you just went through that door to accomplish.
Curtis, you've been around and associated with U of I and all those other places going. So from your position in the organization, I did a podcast for Chief Rhodes last week, Safety Through Competence. How much does the culture of the organization and our commitment to training really impact firefighter safety, if you will, or being smart? I know you're a visionary in those areas, but how essential is that to our success and survival? I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear your take on it.
Really and truly, I think it's everything. I mean, I think sometimes, just like Daniel was just talking about, when you're messing with your gear and you're messing with your hose and you're messing with the tools and you're messing with your radios and stuff, you're not ready to be in a fire. All that stuff needs to be second nature. Putting your mask on, getting on the right radio channel, carrying your tools, carrying your can, all that stuff needs to be second nature. And if you can't do that, then you're not thinking about what's really important, which is being smart, being deliberate, seeing what the building's doing, seeing what the fire's doing. There has to be some grown-ups on the scene that go, do we really need to be in here, or are we just doing this because we're aggressive? My department here, we expect them to be, quote, aggressive. We expect them to be smart. We make them, we want them to be thinking. We want them to do what's right. They can audible if they need to, because we can't be the eyes and the ears where they're at that very second. And that has to come through training. If I've got a 2-year guy on the job here, we want them to work just like a 10-year guy. But you can't get that unless you're good training. Just like Daniel did. We're all not getting fires every day. We're not running 6-7 fires like they did in the Warriors in New York, which made those guys the people that we looked up to because they were smart, but they did it from street. But when you can't get it on the street, you have to get it through training and you have to get it through repetition. You know, the other day we were looking at new air packs and I'm sitting there and I'm putting my regulator into a mask, sitting at a table, conference table, and I've got the regulator in one hand, the mask in the other, and I'm sitting there putting them together repeatedly. And some guys looking at me going, what are you doing? I goes, I'm muscle memory. You know, all my life I've been taught to do all these things so they're second nature, you know, and that's the way we have to get it, is we got to get these mundane things second nature so that we can think of the big stuff. And you can't do that without training. You can't do it without making it deliberate, setting expectations, and just repeat it. I think sometimes, and Daniel said something really good. He goes, when he does these LODDs, he knows the ending. And one of the things I say is sometimes we're trying to be heroes instead of being heroes, you know, and that goes with getting your helmet dirty. And it goes, so when you're doing these LODD investigations in all of us, because we love firefighters, we love this job as much as we do, they're already a hero. And it's hard for us to go back and nitpick that, or to really find where we failed them or they failed themselves. And I think it behooves us, especially people who've been around a while or bosses or responsible for these people, is sometimes we got to go back and look at the bad things. Guy didn't have his mask on the roof. Why? Is it a system problem? Is it an SOP problem? Is it we've let it happen so long that now it's second nature? You know, bosses aren't being bosses saying, put your mask, you know, what is the cause that he was up there and he fell through the hole? You know, there's 7 things there that we should be looking at, from training to what's the policies, to do we hold these guys accountable to the policy, or is it just cool to be on the roof without a, you know? So I think there's a lot of things that go into it, but it all goes back to training and expectations and holding people to what the department is setting. You know, tell people all the time, and you guys both, is there is a line for what we can go down and put our heads on the bed at night and go to sleep with. And we have to hold our guys to that. You know, they pay you, Scott, as the chief of department, to set the boundaries. And at night, you've got to be able to sleep. And you've got to be able to sell to the 5 or 7 people you got on the dais and all the 50,000 people for the city of Colony. Sometimes you can't be friends. Sometimes you can't be, you know, it's a whole different dynamic you got to look at.
Right on, right on. Daniel, we know a lot of the same chiefs. We travel in a lot of the same circles. So what do you say to these fire chiefs that say they're all in on safety? You know, they're talking about cancer prevention, they're talking about the mental health aspect, but they're not all in on training. Talk about that for a little bit, because to me, and Chief Salka has said this numerous occasions, training's not the most important thing, it's the only thing. So what do you say to those chiefs who want to talk about how they take care of their guys, yet they don't let them train realistically? They don't support training. The minimum is okay.
Well, and that's probably the other word that needs to leave the fire service, is the word minimum. Even here in Texas, with the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, which we're one of the few states that has that, the most frequent word that you can find in those documents besides the word fire is the word minimum. Everything's minimum. And if you try to raise that bar, you end up with people arguing all the time. But in reality, you know, the authority having jurisdiction can raise the bar, and that's what we want to say. So yeah, to those chiefs, I struggle with that, because you're not doing a service. You're not serving your firefighters. You're not serving your fire department, and you're damn sure not serving the community as a fire chief. This, like we all know, this is, you can't train too much for a job that can kill you. We all agree with that. And to look at some of these assumptions and make the assumption that they're just going to do the right thing when they get there, but no one's exercised that. Nobody's drilled on that. Nobody's educated on that. That's a failure. That's a horrible failure to the system. And so, yeah, so the departments that aren't providing the training or finding some way to get the companies, I know sometimes it's a struggle to get them out of service or to have service delivery standards met, but at the same time, drilling and training, I know it's a headache. I'm well aware of that, because we all know, because we're all in the training world and we do teach and train for other departments. So I understand the headache. But to your point, and it's not just the firefighters, like what Curtis said just a few minutes ago. Every now and then somebody will ask me, they'll say, well, are you the safety oriented guy, or are you the mad dog? You know, we're the last hope. And this is my answer. when I was on the fire truck, when I was a chief, I wanted mad dog firefighters on that fire truck. I wanted mad dog firefighters who were as trained, and they were passionate about training more, because we all know, and by the way, I'll throw this out there. If you are highly trained and highly prepared and highly trained, and you believe that, you know you need more training, because it never stops. It's not a box that gets checked. And you and I, we all know that the folks who think they're highly trained, they stink. They're terrible. They're failures. So I want mad dog firefighters to come off that rig, that if those kids are still screaming in the back bedroom, no matter what, they're going to find a way to get to those kids. But what I have to have is that company officer who occasionally has the guts and the cojones to grab them by their mask or strap or whatever it is and say, hey, back up. We're not going down that hallway. We're not going in that house. And that's a tough call to make. And for those of us who've had to make those split-second decisions, those are gut-wrenching, especially when you have a credible report of somebody in there. And it's like, we're not going and getting them. It ain't happening. And that's a tough call to make. I mean, it's something we have to live with. And you talk about putting your head on the pillow at night. It's like I've got that weight on my shoulder, but I also have the weight of the lives of the men and women who represent our department, whose family I may have to talk to before the end of the day, and give them the worst news of their life, that their world is forever changed. I can tell you which one of those two I'd rather live with and put my head on the pillow. So when you say training, not only are you training your firefighters, are you training your company officers to make that split-second decision? Are you training your incident commanders to oversee, the actual big picture? I mean, the problem with most company officers is they don't want to admit they don't have situational awareness. I think that's another term we should really talk about a lot more. You're task fixated. If you're the first due engine company, you have tasks to do. You don't have an awareness of the entire situation. If you're going to the roof to do vertical ventilation, you don't have a situational awareness of what's happening downstairs necessarily anymore, or what your third due company or water supply or other things that your incident commander might see. So we become task fixated, which there's nothing wrong with that. But now you're cashing in your situational awareness. All the more reason that you need to have a safety chief, or you need to have, two sets of eyes, or at least an incident commander there. But if you look at most of the line of duty deaths that I was involved in, most of those folks were killed in the 5 to 7 minute period of time. In the Southwest End fire in Houston, 5 firefighters were dead 7 minutes and 45 seconds into the fire. It was that quick. So you don't get to have all of those steps or fail-safe check marks. You don't have they didn't have the battalion chief, and they didn't have the second due truck company, and they didn't have, a safety officer in place yet. It was too late. So now that goes all back to the decision-making capabilities of those initial firefighters going through the door, the initial crews. If we get on an engine company and we go through the door with a chief standing in the front yard with 30 years on the job, we feel a certain way about walking in that building. We have somebody that has our back. But if we walk into the same building and he's not there, she's not there yet, or they've only got 1 year on the job and they barely got any fire experience, we don't have our backs, right? We have somebody there trying, but they don't have the experience. So how do we correlate that now to the decision making of the company officer? Now do I err on the side of smart and say, you know what, I'm not real comfortable with this. We don't have the right crews coming in, or I just heard the second due engine said they got caught by a train, or they're tied up in traffic. Well, now it's going to alter my tactics. It's going to alter my strategy for sure.
Well, like always, we could do another 2 hours of this easily. And Daniel, you brought a lot of insight. So as we wrap up our hour, Curtis, final words. We talked about in the line of duty, and I'm looking at not just as line of duty deaths, but as expectations for operating in a line of duty. So give us some final thoughts, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to find out about all the awesome stuff going on in the Pearland Fire Department?
I think the biggest thing, and we've talked about it, and all three of us are huge in this, is just train, set expectations, and hold each other to it. It's a lot of talent, a lot of good motivation, a lot of good attitude in this business. Get all of it you can from the day you start till, the day you finish. Even after you finish, keep doing it and pass it on to everybody. But understand that we don't want to have, Daniel doesn't want to be out doing these investigations. So it's up to each of us. It's going to happen, and we know it's going to happen, but let's try to minimize it by knowing our jobs, knowing what's out there going to kill us, and how we save it, how we keep it, and how we protect each other and look out for each other.
Outstanding. Chief Deyear, good to have you on finally. And Curtis, how can they get in touch with you?
If anybody wants to get a hold of me, they can get a hold of me at Pearlander. They can get a hold of me at cbirt@me.com.
Chief Deyear, closing thoughts on in the line of duty, culture, mindset, and how can you're going all over the place, man, teaching leadership and all that. How can people get in touch with you?
Okay. Well, parting thoughts is it's not about you. It's about the community. It's about the department. It's about the men and women you work with. And that's who your focus should be on. The word service is in our name. We're in the fire service, which means you give. It's not about you. And I think that's where my heartache comes from. Some of the folks trying to get their helmets jacked up. They don't even own the helmets. The community owns the helmet. The department owns the helmet. So it's not about you. If anybody wants to reach out to me, my email is chiefdeyear@gmail.com. My website is chiefdeyear.com. So if anybody wants to go to my website, you can get a hold of me through the social media. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. But that's how they can get a hold of me. And yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody because I still have plenty of passion for the fire service. So.
Well, thank you both. We'll be back the third Wednesday next month with hopefully Chief Lasky and Chief Salka. To everybody who tuned in, thank you. We like to close out these shows by recognizing the men and women in the military, and right now that's a very marginal situation. So we certainly send our prayers to those people, and we always want to remind everybody: never forget means never forgetting. Thank you for joining in, Chief Birt, Chief Deyear. Thank you very much. We'll have you on again.